Before I met Jesus, I was, as some of you may know, a tax collector. And the day that the master saw me, heartless and still cheating others at my own money table, he called me out by name. And against every single convention, he invited himself over to my house for dinner. And I have never been the same since then. The 40 retellings of this book come from my account of Jesus' death and resurrection. You see, I'm writing here the first of 40 different retellings in this book. My opening verses above of the Passion story set the stage for everything else that follows, because I highlight two opposite understandings of what really happened and why, and who Jesus might have been and is today. In chapters 21 to 25 of my gospel, Jesus entered the city of Jerusalem on a donkey. He taught in the temple. He turned over tables of the money changers. He didn't overthrow the Romans like everyone expected the Messiah to do. You see, Jesus made choices all week that fit his Father's plan to die for his wayward people. And I'm going to be honest, yes, even we, his disciples, were under the critical spell of wanting a victorious Messiah and had no readiness for our Master to be crucified. Below is the longer and important version I remember of my summary. It's a message that was spoken originally to us disciples before we arrived in Jerusalem. Brothers, as the Passover celebration begins, please be aware of your misunderstandings about the Messiah and God's kingdom. Recall my repeated and past predictions as we walked between the villages. I must die at the hands of the religious leaders, then I will be raised from the dead. Friends, the time for my death is now, so be alert. I know the exact schemes of my enemies, and they're playing into the divine master plan. Don't miss this. It's the Father who is handing me over to their evil intent. And they're going to be shocked one day to know that they were used by God to offer me up as a Passover lamb for sin's final sacrifice. You see, everything that would happen this week was not a surprise to our Savior. But not surprisingly, there was the more common understanding of how and why Jesus died. You see, by the time Passover week was over, it was pretty much the view held by almost anyone else, that Jesus was not the Jewish Messiah or Son of God. He may have done miracles and taught God's law really well, but when the time came for him to show his true colors, he failed to do so. The priests rightly determined him dangerous and guilty of blasphemy, and Rome too did what Rome needed to do, and that is to get rid of any potential rivals to Caesar's rule. You see, calling oneself the king of the Jews in front of Pilate will get you killed for certain. Now, to understand Jesus' words here, you have to remember the initial enthusiasm of Palm Sunday and the common people's hope that Jesus was the Messiah, the Savior they had long awaited. The religious leaders, on the other hand, were both personally threatened by Jesus' popularity and were receiving pressures from the Roman rulers to calm the holiday revelry and potential rioting. But if the Sanhedrin arrested Jesus during the Passover, the crowds might find out and end up rioting in the streets demanding Jesus take power, and that sort of risk could not be taken. So, the religious leaders planned to take control of the situation by secretly arresting Jesus, the blasphemer, after the Passover celebration. By then, they reasoned, the crowds would be disillusioned, seeing Jesus for the impostor that he is, and they would begin to head home anyway. They could now easily apprehend Jesus before he left the city and avoid a potential uprising from the crowds. And his arrest would then be followed by a trial whose verdict was already cast. From there, they'd find a way to do away with this imposter Messiah once and for all. The Jewish leaders formed an airtight plan based on a flawless interpretation of the facts, or at least so they thought. But things didn't unfold as they originally planned, as you'll see in the pages and stories that follow. I hope the testimonies of this story's characters will help you answer the critical question, did Jesus die as the Messiah and Son of God, and was everything to happen as it did? Or did his death happen by accident, a surprise to both Jesus and his followers, but the rightly initiated execution of a guilty man? Come, listen and decide for yourselves about the cross of Jesus Christ. And here's a prayer. Father, open our eyes and ears as we read the greatest of all stories, how and why your Son died on the cross and rose from the grave. Was his suffering on Calvary an accident or the result of your initiation? The verdict matters to us all, and especially those who have faced chaotic and difficult times. To us, when we've ever wondered if our own chaotic world has a purpose, would you guide us toward your truth and then help us live in your Son's death and resurrection?